Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. This is Dr. Halima. Today, lecture number 8, and the title of our lecture is A Short Introduction to Arabic-English Translation. Now, during our lecture, we will be, of course, going through the learning objectives, and we will be going through the following points. We will talk about the emphasis of Islam on learning a foreign language, and then translation in the early days of Islam, and the translation during the Abbasid age, and then we will go through the methods of translation in the Abbasid age, then a translation during the French invasion of Egypt, then translation during Muhammad Ali's rule in Egypt. Then we will finish off the lecture saying something about the effect of the Arabic translation on European movement of translation. So let's start with Islam's emphasis on. No, let's see how the learning objectives. Now, by the end of this lecture, which is very important, you should be able to show knowledge of what? Of the importance of translation in Islam. We will see later. Second, you should be able to develop a historical background or historical knowledge of translation in the Arab world. And then you should be able to show understanding of the main translation method used by Arab translators. These are the learning outcomes. You should be able to achieve them by the end of this lecture. In other words, when you have seen this lecture, or when you have gone through it, when you have read it, you have to ask yourself, have I achieved these learning objectives or not? All right? Now, let's see. Islam, one of the characteristics of Islam is that it emphasizes on learning in general, and it has emphasized on learning a foreign language, to the extent that learning a foreign language is like a religious duty. Now, if we take just one example of the Holy Quran, as you can see in the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ وَإِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Now, in English, and among his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the variations in your languages and your color. Verily, in that are signs of those who know. Now, we can learn from this great verse that because we have different nations and obviously different languages, we need to learn the language of one another so that we would be able to communicate with one another. And obviously, we can either communicate verbally or in writing. And we can infer from this particular verse that we cannot communicate with the Chinese or with the English people or with the French without the process of translation. Can we? I mean, if you want to communicate with the English people, you need either to learn a language, English language, or to translate from Arabic into English. So this is an evidence that Islam has given a great emphasis on learning a foreign language. Now, it's not only the Holy Quran. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has also expressed his interest in learning a foreign language, or encouraged us to learn a foreign language, and emphasized on the importance of learning a foreign language. Now, it was reported that the Prophet said, he who knows the language of a people has a full protection against their evil intentions. Again, we can infer from this particular hadith saying that there are a lot of benefits of learning a foreign language. Not only to protect ourselves from their evil intentions, but as well we can benefit from people of different languages. We can spread the word of Islam. We can solve our problems with them by learning their foreign languages. So this is just very briefly an example of Islam's emphasis on learning a foreign language. I'm sure some of you might have more examples or better examples than those from the Quran and from the Sunnah. There are probably there are some other verses or some other hadiths which proves this point. So I leave it to you to do your research. Now, point number 2, this is another point which as well gives you an idea how translation became more important in the early days of Islam. Now, in the early days of Islam, there were two major powers or superpowers, like the Persian power and the Roman power. And because they were, due to lack of writing papers, for example, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet of Islam, Allahumma salli alayka ya Rasulullah, sent a message to Hercules, a Roman military leader at that time, written on a piece of animal skin. Now, this is an example of how they communicated with the Romans. Now, the Prophet's message wrote a message, and to be able to translate this message from Arabic into Roman language, you need to go through the process of translation or the process of interpreting. But at least this is an example of a written message by the Prophet to Hercules. Now, because of the geographical and political situation at that time, it has expanded, and the Muslim territories became bigger and bigger, so Arabs started to travel in large areas beyond the Arabian Peninsula and started to get interested in what? In learning a foreign language. So they started to learn Persian, Latin, and Greek. So this is just very briefly, I'm taking you through history, very briefly, to show you the importance of learning a foreign language and the importance of translating or interpreting from the early days of Islam. Now, when we reach Abbasid age, between 811 and 1331, during that age, about 200, 300 years, people got interested in getting to know what? To know what other nations have achieved in the field of knowledge, learning, science. And the nations they were contacting or near to them, they were the Romans, the Greek, and the Persians. So the only way to know what these nations had achieved in the field of science, in the field of art, in the field of philosophy or learning, was only the way through the process of translation. So during the era of the time of Khalifa al-Ma'mun, translation prospered and expanded and became very popular, to the extent al-Ma'mun gave an order to establish al-Hikmah, Dar al-Hikmah, the house of wisdom for translators. Why? Because they were very, very much interested in getting to know the knowledge of other people, other nations. But the translators were very selective. They did not translate anything, but they were very selective. They looked for works that would benefit them, like works on philosophy, on medicine, on engineering, music, and logic. So all these, types of knowledge were translated from Greek into Arabic, while other works such as astronomy, art, law, history, and music as well were translated from Persian into Arabic. So you can see that during al-Ma'mun there was a big movement of translation, and they started to translate really well and heavily. Now, regarding the methodology of translators, or the methodology that translators used during the Abbasid age, to be honest, like the Europeans, or like the Romans, or like the Greek before them, they used two types, two methods. One literal and one free. The pioneers of these two methods were Yohanna bin Batriq's method, which was mainly literal, they call it the literal way, and Hunayn bin Ishaq's method, the free way. It means a free translation. Now, regarding Batriq's method, its literal translation or literal method, it has its demerits, because there were certain linguistic differences between Greek and Arabic, and they could not really find an equivalent, the exact equivalent in Arabic. So they had to keep, or they had to use, or they had to follow a literal way of translating, like philosophy. They couldn't find a word in Arabic which was equivalent to philosophy. That's why it was kept. So they borrowed it from Greek. Again, democracy. They borrowed it from Greek. So they still exist in Arabic. This is the method of Yohanna bin Batriq and those who followed him. Now, another method used in the same era was Hunayn bin Ishaq. Hunayn bin Ishaq, tried to or favored and preferred free translation to literal translation. Why? Because this gives the translator the liberty to omit what is necessary and to add what is necessary, to delete what is not necessary, and to add what is necessary. Why? To enable the reader understand the message to be translated or needed to be translated. Now these two methods have dominated the process of translation, to be honest, throughout history, whether in the Western world or in the Arab world. Started literal method, and then a free method, and there's some other methods, of course, must have developed from these two main methods. Now, after the Abbasid, I would like to take you right away to the translation during the French invasion of Egypt in 1789. Now, when Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt in 1789, he brought with him translators and interpreters to help him communicate with the Egyptians with regard to the political, social, and administrative affairs, to be able to communicate with the local people. Now, during that time, the task of the translators who came from France was to translate official administrative documents, and sometimes they acted as interpreters, especially, when something happens between, the locals and the French. So the main task for these interpreters and translators was really business-oriented, task-oriented. They wanted to serve the French or the Bonaparte's campaign. But what happens that some translators were really interested in doing another type of translation. Like we have this translator like Jean-Michel Venteur de Pardy, who was born 1776. Now what he did, he came and he enjoyed translating, and he looked at translating as a pastime activity. That's why he started to translate arts, and he looked at it as a linguistic exercise rather than an official or technical or professional task. So you can see that there were so many reasons for people to translate or to interpret from Arabic into French or from French into Arabic during that period. Okay. Now when the French left Egypt and Muhammad Ali came to rule Egypt in 1805, from 1805 to 1848, Muhammad Ali. Now, when Muhammad Ali's rule started, and as far as translation is concerned, we can see that translation took a different form. It became independent. It became an independent movement, and it thrived. It thrived, it prospered. It became very popular, very interesting to people during the time of Muhammad Ali. You know why? Because Muhammad Ali himself was very much interested in learning about, not about the Arabs, about the European civilizations. That's why he tried all forms of education available in his time to bring to his people. So he was trying to make education of all forms available to to the people of Egypt, and then he has to really bring education from Europe. How would he do that? By the process of translation. That in this case, what he did, or he sent people to Europe, to France, or to Europe, and then he brought people to Egypt, and he asked the translators to translate so many books from French, from English, from Turkish into Arabic. Now, in his book, somebody called Ahmad Izzat Abdul Karim, in his book about history of education in Muhammad's period, what he said? He said, as far as the scientific renaissance is concerned, it would be no exaggeration to call Muhammad Ali's time the period of translation. Now, this author, this scholar, acknowledges Muhammad Ali's interest in translation to the extent that he would call Muhammad Ali rule about 40 years, it is 40 years of translation, the period of translation, the rule of translation, whatever you call it. It was mainly translation oriented period, because he wanted to bring all science, art, philosophy from other nations to the Arab nations. Now, regarding the method, again, it wasn't literal, and it wasn't really communicative, or it wasn't like free translation. It was literal but very awkward structural language, because they used to translate from Turkish into Arabic, and the translation was not literal, but still it had some Turkish words in it. Now, the translation movement in Egypt was a great incentive, not only for people in Egypt, but for all people around the world, the Arab world. So translation started to expand all over the Arab world, and the new translators became interested in translating from and into Arabic. Now, because of this movement, because of this interest in translation, we can see that the quality of translation and how translators approach translation started to improve. You know, so instead of literal with some demerits, then it became a bit more polished and better quality, because the more you translate, the more you practice, the better you become in translation. All right. So this is very brief. Very briefly, I have gone through with you translation, or a little introduction to Arabic English translation, or translation in the Arab world. Now, the last point I would like to put to you is, you know, the effect of Arab translators on European movement of translation. Now, as you can see, Arab translators translated works from of Greek authors like Aristotle, Plato, and so on, and made Baghdad. Baghdad was the site of what we might be called the school of translation. Baghdad during Abbasid time was the school of translation, because so many people were interested in translating knowledge, science, art from Greek into Arabic, from Persian into Arabic. But unfortunately, as you probably know, that when the Arab civilization started to decline, then who replaced Baghdad, or who replaced Baghdad? Toledo in Spain, a city in Spain, replaced Baghdad and started to attract the attention of Western translators. So the Western translators went to Toledo, Spain, and started to work on translating what? Translating the works of Greek origin, to translate them from Arabic into Latin, and then later on translators from different nationalities translated Latin works into their native language. In other words, all the works held in Toledo were in Arabic, all right? Were in Arabic, but of a Greek origin. So translators started to translate from Arabic into Latin, and then other translators started to translate from Latin into other nationalities and other nationalities or other languages such as English, French, German, Italian. So from Arabic into Latin, from Latin into other languages. But Arabic came from the Greek. So work from the Greek language came into Arabic, and then from Arabic into Latin, and then from Latin to French, English, and German, and Italian, and so on. Then a different type of translation movement started in the West, which is not our concern here. So I hope you have had now some idea about the importance of translation in Islam and the method of translation among Arab translators during the early days of Islam and during Abbasid age, and then during the French invasion of Egypt, and then during Muhammad Ali's rule of Egypt, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.